Now, my father's story becomes inextricably intertwined with these individuals. My father served in the United States Navy. My father was on the ships that dealt with the rescuing of the crew from the sinking aircraft carrier, the Franklin, in World War II, which was struck by a kamikaze pilot and ultimately was taken out of the war. And, of course, later on, of course, my father was on during World War II, while it was still legally on, under conditions of ceasefire. On June 5th of 1945, my father began to understand Japanese magic. Throughout the war, such as his experience with the Franklin, when the kamikaze pilots were body crashing into planes in other ships and other planes, meaning American bombers, like B-29 bombers, and of course ships. These pilots were sacrificing their bodies in order that their souls would aggregate and bring about the kamikaze, meaning divine storm, in Japan to protect Japan from the American invasion. Had the Americans not sued for peace after their invasion of Okinawa, they would have had to have proceeded with trying to invade Japan out of Okinawa. All of their forces that were based in Okinawa were utterly destroyed when the kamikaze appeared out of nowhere, as it had hundreds of years before, and destroyed the Mongol fleet. When the kamikaze appeared and destroyed all American forces on Okinawa, it required an evacuation operation so large it received a military name of its own, Operation Magic Carpet, an operation as large as D-Day, but in reverse, in which American injured had to be brought back to the United States. Something that was so hidden, you've never heard of it. My father was on the USS Pittsburgh at the time. The USS Pittsburgh was a very small destroyer. It was overcome by waves that were 10 stories high. 10 stories high. They broke the bow off of the USS Pittsburgh. We have footage of it. It's on YouTube. That link to YouTube video will be put into the chat room by my executrix producer, Laura Lee Solomon, right now. My father survived that, along with a few hundred other sailors, and they made it back to the West Coast to replace that bow with a wooden bow. As a matter of fact, they had to stop off at Hawaii to replace the bow with a wooden bow so they could make it back to the West Coast to repair the USS Pittsburgh. So my father, later on, had even more horrific experiences in the Navy, and this was during the Vietnam War. Very important to remember that the amount of sailors that died in the Vietnam War was enormous. 2 million United States Navy personnel served in Vietnam, and 2,600 of them were killed in action. 10,000 of them were injured in action. And ultimately, of course, an enormous number of them died, of course, in non-combat injuries, especially on the aircraft carriers. Working on an aircraft carrier was the most dangerous of work. Costly accidents were commonplace. Ultimately, they experienced no less than 11,000 non-combat deaths, none of which are on the Vietnam Memorial Wall. All of these were suffered by U.S. sailors from 1964 to 1975. When I was born on October 20th of 1966. My father wasn't there. My father served at that time on the Oriskany. My father was even given an invitation to be buried on the Oriskany. The Oriskany was ultimately sunk, destroyed to create a reef, an artificial reef. Sailors who had served on it were given the option that their ashes could be interned within the Oriskany. At the time it was destroyed, and afterwards to this day, when World War II veterans who served on the Oriskany, if they want to be interred in that reef as ashes, they will do so for you. And of course, my father was on the Oriskany when what had happened was a magnesium flare started a fire. A veteran who was on the ship at that time threw the magnesium flare into a storage locker to try and suffocate it with lack of oxygen. Unfortunately, that storage locker contained 600 more such flares. A huge fire resulted that ignited ammunition and aviation fuel. And ultimately, my father was trapped down below and rescued as many men as he could. All of the men that ultimately burned to death are asphyxiated because it took several hours for fighting fire crews to bring the blaze under control. Those surviving, many of them were pushed out through portholes by my father, who was skinny enough to get back in and out. The final death toll was 44 men that were injured, and at least as many died. I think, if I remember correctly, about 19 of them were sailors, and about 25 of them were pilots. The carrier was out of action for 8 months. My father then, of course, was transferred because it was out of action to the USS Forrestal. And what happened on the USS Forrestal on the 29th of July in 1967? Again, my father had never yet even come home to see myself as being born. I never met him until I was maybe 2 years old. And what happened on the 29th of July was that the Forrestal was crippled by fire in an attack that killed more people than any other attack by the Vietnamese during the entire Vietnam War. Basically, what happened was, prior to a major combat mission, very similar to the Japanese when they were loading up their torpedo planes and were attacked by the Americans at Midway, you had a fully armed combat aircraft, many of them massed on deck. And what happened was that Senator John McCain was in an A4E Skyhawk, and he did what was called a wet start, which means he made his plane fart to impress the young pilot behind him. He started a jump start on the plane, which created a huge fireball, which blasted into the face of the pilot behind him to scare the young pilot. The young pilot, of course, slipped, and he wound up in his McDonnell F-4 Phantom launching a Zuni missile. And this fired into the fuel tank of John McCain's A4E Skyhawk. And what happened was one of the crewmen on deck ran up and rescued John McCain specifically so he could stand trial for his criminal act. And unfortunately, at that point, a huge chain of explosions began all around them on the aft deck. Bombs, missiles, aviation fuel detonated. 2 destroyers and 3 other carriers had to be involved in fighting the fire. It took 12 hours to control. In the end, 134 United States Navy personnel had been killed, 60 injured, and 62 aircraft destroyed. John McCain single-handedly did more to damage the American war effort in Vietnam than any Vietnamese pilot ever could. And what he did was he took off on a plane the next day to escape trial, and he asked for a mission, begged for a mission. They sent him over into Vietnam, where he parachuted, abandoned his plane, surrendered to the Vietnamese, and was taken into the Hanoi Hilton, where he was known and identified by men such as Senator Denton as a collaborator with the communists. And this individual, of course, when his camp commandant came to visit the United States, John McCain rushed up to him and hugged him. And this is the kind of traitor that we're speaking about. And yet John McCain is vilified as a traitor because he is someone who in Vietnam with the gunboats was either there or wasn't for a very short period of time, from 66 to 68. During that period of time he was there, in the Winter Soldier hearings, he confessed that he had killed a young boy by shooting him in the back because the Viet Cong used young boys as soldiers. And when he shot a fleeing young boy in the back, he said he was responsible for an atrocity. He admitted that American soldiers were committing atrocity. When he ran for president of the United States, the Swift Boat personnel all got together and claimed that he was never there. Now, this is possible. He, for that short period of time in the Navy, received more medals than Audie Murphy in all of World War II. He was practically the most decorated sailor in all of human history for a period of 2 years time. He probably got a lot of false medals awarded to him. This happened to myself in the sense that I, of course, had captured, because I spoke Arabic, having been in Iraq before the war, during the Gulf War, was able, with my squad, to amass hundreds of prisoners. And when we brought them back behind the line, we had radioed ahead that logistics and quartermass needed to prepare to feed and clothe and wash hundreds of prisoners. The officer in charge of my unit filled out all the necessary paperwork and got himself a medal for bringing in hundreds of prisoners of war that were brought in by myself. Kerry probably did something similar with all of his medals, got himself decorated. Now, the question is a moot point. It's a circular argument. Either he was never there at all, or he was there and he's a war criminal. He's damned either way by his own admission or by the allegations of the Swift boat people who were saying he wasn't there in order to prevent themselves from being prosecuted for atrocities and war crimes. So we have this situation that is faced in general, but what happens is that Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino, through, of course, his cultist Stephen Outrim, who has appeared with him on radio, literally on a station known as Hillbilly Radio Network, and, of course, has appeared with him on a show known as The Week in Conspiracy. This individual, Stephen Outrim, asked myself out on a homosexual date, which I refused, vowed to destroy me, appeared on radio with Michael Aquino because he had worked with him before. Of course, we have screenshots of his communications with Michael Aquino before he even asked me out. Apparently was trying to discredit me before he asked me out, and afterwards vowed to destroy me, has written a nonstop column against me, and has called on John Lillier, Jonn, and his surname spelled Lilyea, to basically defame myself and my late and sainted father. So John Lillier publicly now has a long column in which, apparently, because I get death threats from all kinds of veterans saying that I falsified my father's records. My father's tombstone is provided by the Veterans Administration. He was buried with no less than 12 medals on his chest, and his tombstone says World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. Now, all of his service is denigrated by veterans who claim my father was never there, just as they claim I was never in the Marines. John Lillier also attacks people like Paul Rieckhoff, who runs the IAVA, the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America organization. And, of course, he claims that this man is wearing medals he doesn't deserve. All of this, of course, goes back to the fact that Stephen Outrim and Michael Aquino use these Gangstalking organizations like those of John Lillier's. John Lillier is, of course, running something called This Ain't Hell, but you can see it from here, because his cult wants to raise hell on earth, and they can see that hell is emerging on earth through the efforts of Michael Aquino. All of these people are trying to defame our service. There's no point in even having any service or even serving, because when you're out from the service, they will claim you're not there. And they will rearrange all of the records to say you weren't there. Like the man who's running the Iraq Veterans Organization to help veterans, Mr. Rieckhoff, is being attacked by John Lillier as someone who didn't earn the medals that he got. And therefore, the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America can't help people because this man's been discredited. This is what I'll talk about in the very near future when we have Gary States on again as the Veterans Administration bureaucrat, and he will tell us about how all of this serves to render service to veterans not only inconceivable, because you're not only is your service questioned, your very quality of service is constantly questioned. But we have gangstalkers like John Lillier who now say that my late and sainted father didn't serve at all. And because of this, I was never able to get my insurance from my late and sainted father's death from the Veterans Administration. This is the horror of the gang stalking we face thanks to your satanic military. Do not serve. Do not enter the military and serve the United States government. They will